our press secretary, gave alternative facts to that.
My goal in this deposition was to be truthful, but not particularly helpful.
Welcome to Unspun, the podcast that makes you better at finding the truth. The way people get news is changing. It used to be that there were many reporters who would research stories and write articles, but now politicians and famous people share information directly with you on social media and the internet. That means you find out things fast, but it's up to you to make sure the information's actually accurate. And newsmakers don't always do their part. The temptation to manipulate information is strong. They bend the truth to deceive so that they can avoid accountability, so that they can advance their agendas. When you recognize these agendas, you can sometimes find out what's real. And we're at a crossroads where anyone can share anything online, so it's important to sharpen your critical thinking skills. Finding that deception before it goes viral is pretty much a survival skill now, and we're going to do it together. Let's get unspun. Hello, truth seekers, and welcome to this week's episode of Unspun. Because I do come to you from North Carolina in the United States, I hope you'll indulge me in an episode that's close to home for me right now: disaster misinformation. But before we get started, I wanted to remind folks who subscribe to the free Substack at TheUnspunPodcast.substack.com that the latest issue has the information for you to sign up for the birthday live stream and chat on Zoom. I'm so looking forward to talking to you, but you do need to sign up. So go find that last issue and let me know that you're coming. Today, we're diving into a topic that's become sadly predictable in the wake of just about any major disaster: misinformation. You know, it's like clockwork. You got a hurricane or a wildfire or a massive earthquake, and the images of devastation are just quickly followed by a wave of rumors and false claims and outright conspiracy theories. And I'm sad to tell you that Hurricane Helene has been no exception. I'm going to break down exactly what kind of misinformation has spread after the storm, how it's impacting rescue and recovery, and most important, how we can all become more discerning consumers of information, especially when it matters most in a crisis. Sound good? Let's get unspun. Now, I know that wading into the world of misinformation can be frustrating, even discouraging, but I think it's so important to understand the very real consequences that it can have, especially for people who are already reeling from a disaster. So let's start by getting a clear picture of what's actually been circulating online in the days and weeks after Helene. And y'all, it's been bad. Listen to this set of clips from recent political rallies. I want you to know that what you're about to hear is factually incorrect. It is not at all true.
They stole the FEMA money just like they stole it from a bank so they could give it to their illegal immigrants that they want to have vote for them. We're missing $1 billion they gave them to the migrants that came in, and now we don't have the money. We'll do it, but they don't have the money to take care of it. That's why they're giving you lousy treatment in North Carolina in particular.
Again, that's just not true. And it's been really, really frustrating for people who are doing their best to have to spend their time fighting this huge wave of fake news. Some of the information might sound familiar, especially if you've been following the aftermath of other recent disasters. We are once again seeing false claims about FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency that helps after disasters, hearing about them being involved in shady activities like confiscating donations or even worse, taking people's private property. And so just to be crystal clear here, FEMA does not have the authority to take people's property, and there's no evidence at all to support these claims of confiscation. We've seen the dangerous and really disturbing trend of politicizing aid distribution, with claims circulating that the government's deliberately withholding aid from areas that tend to vote Republican. There's been accusations of this against the federal government and also against the state of North Carolina. And again, this is completely baseless. Reports from the ground have showed that there's widespread relief efforts with no indication of any political bias in how the aid is distributed. Have a listen to how U.S. Representative Jeff Jackson from North Carolina has broken some of the issues down on his social media.
That means we have thousands of soldiers on the ground, 700 folks from FEMA, another 2,000 federal workers from different departments, dozens of nonprofits, Red Cross, Salvation Army, Samaritan's Purse, they're all there. And let's address some specific rumors. No one's land is being taken by FEMA. FEMA doesn't even have the authority to do that. There's no blockade on private aid. There is an enormous amount of private aid rolling in. The only people being turned away are the ones headed down a road that's been destroyed, and a checkpoint is telling them, don't go that way, the road has been destroyed. If you want to bring in a private plane full of supplies, you can do that. The only issue is there's now triple the normal amount of air traffic because of all the planes bringing in supplies, and there have been a bunch of near misses in the air. So they're just asking folks, get in touch with the Emergency Operations Center, let them know you're coming, and the FAA will clear you to land.
But unfortunately, the misinformation doesn't stop there. We also saw some really outlandish conspiracy theories bubbling to the surface, and one particularly disturbing theory claimed that FEMA was engaging in a massive cover-up, that they were actually bulldozing entire communities and even bodies to hide evidence of some lithium mining conspiracy. And if that wasn't crazy enough, another theory has alleged that the government is somehow using weather control technology to steer the hurricane toward Republican voters. And this actually echoes baseless claims made after other disasters, and just shows you how quickly misinformation can spiral into truly wild territory. Now, for the record, that kind of weather control technology just does not exist. Today, I'm recording this on Monday, and I saw people spreading it and trying to sprinkle in a tiny bit of factual information about cloud seeding, just to make their big old pile of hooey sound like there might be something to it, and there's not. You just cannot steer a hurricane. You can't destroy it with nuclear weapons either, but that was a lesson from a different time. Okay. Now, it's easy to dismiss these examples as just fringe theories, the ramblings of a few conspiracy-minded folks online. But here's the thing. That kind of misinformation does not exist in a vacuum. It has real-world consequences, especially in the chaotic and vulnerable aftermath of a disaster. And when we take a step back and look at the broader landscape of misinformation surrounding Hurricane Helene, some really disturbing patterns emerge. And sources point to some key trends that really should concern us all. First, we saw once again how quickly a disaster can be exploited for political gain. Hurricane Helene became yet another opportunity for political opportunists to sow discord and distrust in the government. News articles and editorials from around the country have specifically called out former President Trump, who's using his platform to spread false claims about the Biden administration intentionally withholding aid based on political affiliation. This kind of rhetoric is really dangerous because it undermines public trust in the very institutions that are needed to provide aid and support to people who are hurting. And speaking of dangerous rhetoric, conspiracy theories were unfortunately rampant in Helene and have seen rapid spread. And with those wild allegations of government-controlled weather and whispers about stealing budgets and land, these theories, which are rooted in fear and distrust and pre-existing biases, they can really spread online, particularly on platforms designed to prioritize engagement over accuracy. It's not a coincidence that misinformation tends to flourish in the aftermath of disasters, and research points to a whole bunch of factors that make these events ripe for spreading false or misleading information. Let's start with the elephant in the room, social media. We've talked before about its role in amplifying misinformation, but it's important to remember that social media itself isn't inherently bad. It can be a powerful tool for communication and connection and even crisis response. In my book, We Are Alt-Gov, Inside the Resistance on Social Media, I have a whole chapter on a global crisis response effort that anonymous Twitter accounts put together. They actually saved lives by connecting people who posted a need for help on Twitter with volunteer and civic rescuers. So really, it's not all bad. But here's the problem. By its very design, the algorithms that prioritize engagement and the speed at which information spreads, and with a lack of built-in fact-checking mechanisms, it's incredibly vulnerable to manipulation and the rapid spread of information. This problem is only compounded by the fact that many social media platforms don't have robust content moderation policies. Traditional media outlets, they have fact-checking procedures and editorial oversight, but social media prioritizes allowing information to flow freely, regardless of whether it's true or not. And so what this means is that anybody with an internet connection can publish and share information regardless of whether it's accurate. And during a disaster, when people are just hungry for information, they're often unable to distinguish between credible sources and random social media posts. And so this lack of moderation makes a really fertile ground for information to take root and spread. Plus, newer AI technologies have made it possible to create a lot of that bad information at a minimal cost and very, very quickly. We also shouldn't forget about the human element here. Disasters, by their nature, breed fear and uncertainty and anxiety. We don't know what's happening, right? And when we're afraid, our critical thinking skills tend to go out the window. We're more susceptible believing and sharing sensational or emotionally charged information, even if we know that it doesn't quite add up. And this is especially true when information aligns with our pre-existing biases or our fears, because we're much more likely to accept information that confirms what we already believe. We can add to the mix bad actors who deliberately exploit these vulnerabilities for their own gain. We've seen examples in past disasters about state-run disinformation campaigns that are designed to sow political discord or just undermine trust in one's government. We've also seen individuals who are trying to profit from misinformation by driving traffic to their websites or by pushing specific agendas. And of course, we've seen politicians who want to demonize their opponents, even if they're doing it by telling lies. And these actors often capitalize on that chaos and that fear after disasters because they know that people are more likely to let their guard down and to accept information without questioning it too closely. And there's also the simple fact that we're just bombarded with so much information that it's kind of hard to know who to trust. This information overload makes it even easier for misinformation to slip through because we skim headlines and we retweet without reading, and we prioritize speed over accuracy when we're looking for information. And all of these factors create this kind of a perfect storm where misinformation can really gain traction and spread. This is where the role of social media becomes especially concerning. News articles have underscored how platforms, particularly X, formerly known as Twitter, become breeding grounds for these false narratives. And think about it. Social media algorithms thrive on engagement. They prioritize content that evokes a strong emotional response, whether it's true or not. And during a crisis, when people are desperate for information and prone to being emotional, the algorithms themselves can become super spreaders. What's even more concerning is that the situation on X was exacerbated after Elon Musk's takeover because of a decision to roll back many of the platform's own misinformation policies. And Elon Musk himself has amplified criticisms of the government's response, resharing it, and often it's based on misleading claims, which just kind of adds fuel to the fire. And it highlights the really immense power and responsibility that social media companies have in shaping public discourse, especially in times of crisis. Now, all that theoretical stuff is great, but the impact of misinformation goes far beyond online noise and political maneuvering. It has very real, very tangible consequences for the people who are directly affected by Hurricane Helene. Local officials have reported that they had to divert precious time and resources and personnel just to address the deluge of false claims that are circulating online. I mean, imagine being a first responder and you're already stretched thin, you haven't slept in days, and you're having to chase down rumors of mass casualties instead of focusing on a coordinated search and rescue. Imagine being the governor and you're trying to coordinate a massive rescue effort and you're having to take time to do TV appearances to calm people's belief that your government is leaving some people without water or power based on how they vote. It's a really devastating waste of resources, and every second counts. When false rumors and claims gain traction, authorities are compelled to address them. You can think about those rumors about potential land seizures after Helene. These claims forced officials to dedicate time and personnel and funding to debunking them, and they could have used those resources for actual recovery work, restoring power or clearing debris, getting the roads open. Every minute spent addressing a stupid, baseless rumor is a minute that could have been spent helping people who are in need. While we fight misinformation today, we also need to make combating misinformation more than just a passing concern. There's been some pretty alarming examples of how misinformation has directly interfered with rescue and recovery efforts in the wake of Helene, and it's a stark reminder of the real stakes involved. Real misinformation can hinder emergency responders. For example, there's articles that have talked about where people have shared false reports online about people who are trapped in particular areas. Now, emergency responders are going to have to go and investigate these claims, no matter how improbable they might seem. For example, someone trapped in a place where people don't really live, or in a cave, or stuff like that. And so sometimes this means that they're sending their teams into potentially hazardous situations based on false information. And that's a really heartbreaking scenario because it underscores the very real human cost of this misinformation. So it's something we really need to address and not just wait for the next crisis to make it obvious again. But perhaps the most insidious and kind of long-lasting consequence of misinformation is the way that it erodes public trust. When people are constantly bombarded with false claims about government conspiracies, discrimination, and bad intent, it just corrodes their faith in the very institutions they have to rely on for help during emergencies. And this kind of Chipping away at trust is actually a goal of disinformation campaigns because people who have given up on truth are easier to control with lies. When people are bombarded with conspiracy theories and fake news that the government is doing bad things, they lose their faith in authorities and relief organizations, and they start questioning everything. They doubt official information, sometimes refuse to follow safety guidelines or to accept aid. We saw this during COVID, and we're seeing it again now. And this lack of trust can really cripple recovery efforts, as it makes it really difficult for authorities to disseminate vital information and to help keep people safe. As if that wasn't bad enough, misinformation also has a nasty habit of sowing discord and suspicion within communities themselves. When rumors are spreading about certain areas unfairly getting more resources or getting preferential treatment based on factors like their race, their religion, their voting habits, it fuels resentment and anger and division among people who are already struggling to cope with loss and displacement. One of the things that's kind of amazing to see after a disaster is the way that people will sort of put down their feuds and work together. But if you're encouraging a breakdown of social cohesion, it can be incredibly damaging because that mutual support is really crucial for keeping everybody safe. It makes communities less resilient, and it's harder for them to recover and rebuild together. Okay, so we've covered the bad news, the prevalence of misinformation, its real-world consequences, and what contributes to its spread. But let's shift gears now a little bit and talk about solutions. What could we all do as individuals to navigate this kind of treacherous information landscape and to make sure we're not actually contributing to the problem? Well, here's some practical advice. First, and perhaps most important, is to be mindful of where you're getting your information from. And I will say, during an ongoing disaster, it's a really strong instinct to turn to social media for the latest updates. You can think about, if there's a shooting somewhere, you're probably going to be looking at social media and looking for people who are on the ground sharing the information, because traditional media is going to be slower because they're going to fact check. Social media can be a valuable tool, but it's just absolutely crucial to be discerning about who you trust. So instead of looking for random social media posts or shares from friends even, you're going to want to prioritize organizations with a track record of being accurate and looking at official government websites like FEMA or NOAA or whatever it is in your country, or for well-respected fact-checking organizations like PolitiFact. These sources have systems in place to verify information, and they're accountable for what they report, so they're more likely to have the truth. But even when you're trusting good sources, it's still essential to think critically about the information that you get and not just take everything at face value, especially if you get a strong emotional reaction or you already agree with what it's saying. Misinformation often plays on emotions using really sensational content or emotionally charged language, or just trying to make you afraid, to grab your attention and exploit you. So when you see something that makes you feel that strong way, that makes you afraid, take a second, take a beat, pause, breathe. Ask yourself some critical questions, right? Does the information seem credible? Is it consistent with what I'm seeing from sources that I know are reliable? Does the source have a reason for communicating with me? Do they have an agenda? Maybe this information is outdated or taken out of context. We have seen, for example, people sharing images of disasters, which are actually images of old disasters and have nothing to do with what's going on right now. Another really important tip is to never rely on just one source for your information. You should cross-reference what you see and hear with reports from multiple reputable sources and look for a consensus before you accept something as a fact. If you see something circulating on social media and you haven't seen it in any credible news sources, that's a big red flag. If something sounds too wild to be true, it probably is. All right. That's all the time we have for today. I know we covered a lot of ground, but the bottom line is this. We don't have to be passive bystanders. If we understand how misinformation spreads, if we're critical of our information sources, and if we verify information before we share it, we can all do our part to create a more resilient information ecosystem. And in that way, we can actually help the victims of disasters. Stay sharp, everyone. Thanks for getting Unspun with me this week. Unspun is a production of me, Amanda Sturgill, and is a proud member of the MSW Media family of podcasts. Send me your thoughts and ideas about trickery in the news on Gmail at TheUnspunPodcast@gmail.com. I even write back. And find this episode's show notes and more information at TheUnspunPodcast.substack.com. Want to learn more and get smarter? Check out my book, Detecting Deception: Tools to Fight Fake News, which is available on Amazon or your favorite online bookseller. And until next time, stay sharp, everyone.